wouldn't it be wonderful to open a yoga center here in Ramallah, a place where people can breathe, where families can come and just play and breathe.
Welcome to Conversations on Compassion. I'm Leslie Langbert. Today, my guest is Maha El-Sheikh. Maha is a wonderful spirit. I have very recently had the pleasure to get to know. I'm talking with Maha today because she has a really inspiring story, and she demonstrates an incredible amount of courage, and also in that courage, an example of resistance demonstrated through love and the creation of community. There's often not a lot of stories, I think, that are told about the experience of Palestinians, and this conversation is to lift up and honor as well the work that our teacher also did side by side in the West Bank, and sharing the yoga tradition and sharing yoga teachings. I hope that you enjoy. Welcome, Maha. It's so wonderful to be with you.
Thank you, Leslie. I'm really, really happy to be here.
Hey, yeah, so I've been so looking forward to this conversation for such a long time, and so excited that for our listeners that our paths have been crossing in different ways, but it was just really a few weeks ago that I kind of connected the dots. And so we have a couple of just extremely inspiring, wonderful women in common. So first, our dear mutual friend, Brooke Dodson-Lavelle, who,
Yes.
for listeners, if you go back into our archive, we've got a conversation on compassion with her and her inspiring organization, Courage of Care. And our other deeply, deeply inspiring teacher who just earlier this year left the body, Shraddha Sagar, Ruth Hartong, who is the director of Seven Centers Yoga Arts in Sedona. And so, yeah, I love that we have had these connections with both Shraddha and Brooke now for some time, and that they're light and wisdom, finally brought us together. So
Exactly. And we were even in the same space together and didn't know until you connected the dots a few weeks later. So it's really wonderful. I'm really touched by that.
yeah, it just, everything happens in right time, doesn't it?
Yeah.
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 So
Definitely.
Maha, let's begin with just learning more about you, and just tell us a bit about yourself and your background.
Was kind of raised with a curiosity always about my heritage and culture of the Middle East. Was always kind of raised to be very proud of my Arab background, and at the same time, as a child, trying my best to kind of find my way in fitting in American culture, which maybe those who are also born to immigrant parents might be able to relate with. And I always had this really deep sense of seeking justice. I think from my father, who I can remember so clearly, always kind of talking about fundamental human rights. And I would roll my eyes at the time, but knowing very well, being very touched by that. Um, yeah, from a very young age, I was quite engaged in the pursuit for social justice on various topics, most related to the Middle East, and particularly like the U.S. involvement in the Middle East through the various wars, etc., and especially around Palestine. Um, and the occupation of Palestine and the US's role in supporting the occupation of Palestine. Um, so I in the early around, yeah, 2006 or so, um, after working for a few years in Washington D.C. in international development, which was kind of the path I took to try to address social justice issues internationally. I was relocated to Palestine, which was a dream come true for me. That's kind of how I ended up there. And what was meant to be a 1 year um, job contract turned out to be about 15 years in total. So it was a had a huge influence on my life. Um, and so when I think about, um, yeah, when I think about me or home, Palestine comes up very, very strongly.
What kind of captured your heart in a way that you felt such a desire to want to stay and to really offer your support and offer your gifts there?
Yeah, Palestine captured my heart. That's a beautiful way to put it. Whenever people ask me, where are you from? I would always kind of say my blood is Egyptian and Jordanian, but my heart is Palestinian, and I very much feel that. I don't know if you've ever been there. It's a place of so many contradictions, in the sense that it's a beautiful, beautiful land, geographically speaking, incredible nature. The three of the most holiest religions there. Um, Very special place. And, under settler colonial rule. And I grew up knowing about what was happening in Palestine. So I did not go naively. However, seeing it with my own eyes was something that really made me understand that there was so much that I didn't understand and didn't know also. And even after 15 years of living there and working there, every day I learned something new about what living under occupation actually means, because it's quite shocking. Your life is completely controlled by an external power. And, you know, you wake up in the morning and you don't know if you're going to be able to make it to school or work, how you're going to make it to school or work, whether you're going to make it home or not, whether you're going to have water when you get home, whether there's going to be certain food products or not. So everything we kind of take for granted in the West as just common life is not taken for granted there. With all that said, the people, the Palestinians, are the warmest, most kind and loving, most hopeful people I've ever known. And I was continuously learning and humbled by their ability to live fully, to smile, to laugh, to be generous, to be kind, to be compassionate, even when it really felt like a lot of times the world was completely against them. So a lot of people ask me how I managed to live there for so long, knowing that the situation there is very, very harsh. And I always say it's because of the people. They taught me life. Every day they taught me life, and I'm forever, forever indebted and grateful for that experience, and for the way that they allowed me into their lives. And I just also have to say, in terms of my privilege, you know, I went in with an American passport. It wasn't easy because I am Arab, and so I was treated as an Arab first and not as an American first. So I was often humiliated, strip searched, had guns pointed at me when I would try to enter the country, etc. However, once I was in, because of my passport, I did have free access to all of historic Palestine, which many of my friends and colleagues who were born and raised there did not have the same access. And I was able to even get in, whereas many Palestinian refugees, Palestinians in the diaspora, are not even allowed to go back to visit their own homeland. So I really say this with full acknowledgement of my great privilege to have been able to go at all, and to be welcomed and cared for like I was.
And I'm so struck too by the experiences that you're sharing, that you had this sort of dichotomy between like coming in and being on the receiving end of inequity, but also describing the sense of privilege of being able to gain access to sacred sites. There is just really it's wild. Like I can only imagine what that was like to live that. Hearing that, I'm like, whoa, that has to just feel like you're, spiritually, emotionally, kind of feeling like you're kind of ping-ponged between, okay, so why this treatment in this way, and then this other end of treatment in another way.
Absolutely. And then also being there as an American and seeing like what my government, my tax dollars were doing to fuel that situation, was like another level of it. It was very odd at times. Odd is not really quite the right word, but working in international development, I was working as with U.S. aid funded programs that were, doing good work. And at the same time, it was also U.S. money that was paying for the weapons that were being used to harm people. So it's U.S. tax dollar money that is being used for weapons that kill Palestinian children, and then it's U.S. government money that's going in to deliver the medical equipment to help those same children. So for me, that was kind of the most difficult aspects to kind of deal with and manage, was seeing that kind of hypocrisy in action, I guess, and really woke me up to the harsh realities of neocolonialism today.
Yes, that's so deeply jarring, and I think so many persons that are drawn to work in social justice and social services, even here in the U.S. I know for myself, like making the connect eventually, and that realization of the funding for the organizations that I was employed by, for the most part, like they're kind of the architects of the systems that are creating the issues to begin with, and it is. Yeah. It's a lot to try to reconcile and to find a way through. And so this kind of, to sort of bring us into, how do we make room for all of this, right? Without like turning away from the suffering, and also how do we kind of stay in this place of feeling like, yes, there's still something that I can do. And even though these things are here, something can be done. So let's talk a little bit about, practices and things that you found that maybe help to sustain you in the work, or things that sustain you now as you're kind of, transitioning into new avenues of calling us in to this sense of active hope that Joanna Macy talks about so
Yeah.
beautifully.
Yeah. Thanks. The practices that really supported me looking back at my time there were the yoga and the yoga practices that you and I both have been practicing and involved with. When I got to Palestine, I was quite new to yoga and myself, but it was that practice that I felt grounded, helped to ground me the most, and missed like kind of all of the external and inner turmoil that I was feeling and dealing with. And the other thing that really supported was community. And Palestine has such a rich, like hospitable culture of community, and a very rich kind of culture of volunteerism and mutual aid. And so when I was, working in international development and, seeing we're kind of hustling and trying to get as much money as possible to do these programs that last for a year or two, and then they go away, and then what? And nothing seems to really be changing. And yet all around me, you could see that there were other kind of community driven activities taking place that were just part of the Palestinian culture, that didn't need lots of donor money or anything. It was all based off of mutual aid and volunteerism. And just thinking, wow, that seems to work. And really questioning, this other model of development. So I was always really struck by that kind of community-led work and mutual aid, and I think that really for me resonated, and I think is what keeps people so hopeful, and life affirming, is that like sense of community, and I definitely benefited from that as well. So. And I was always so struck, when I would get really, really upset, and I got really upset a lot. I was scared, and I was upset and frustrated, and I would just look to my colleagues and my friends and see, how are they managing? And it was through the practice of joy together in community, the family gatherings, the friend gatherings, the barbecues, the dancing, the drinking coffee, the smoking argila, even though that's probably not the healthiest choice, but just all of the way of relating and being with each other was what really struck me as well. I should kind of say also that, one of my major driving forces of actually leaving the US when I did was also because I felt like I didn't belong in the US at that time. And part of that could have been, living this double life of like the Arab Americanness, always being hyphenated, always being asked, where am I from, compounded with 9/11 and, all of that took place. And I felt back then it was very difficult for me to find that sense of community and to also have these conversations that we're having today. And so then, going and living in a place like Palestine and kind of seeing all of that in action really felt like a coming home for me. Even though, again, I'm not from there, but kind of seeing how being able to take part in that type of community like that was very, very meaningful. And so all of that kind of came together a few years later to kind of put for this project. I shouldn't say a project, it's a community center that myself and a bunch of internationals and Palestinians kind of started, which is the Farashe Yoga Centre. And I think for me that was probably my biggest kind of coping mechanism was starting and running this yoga center.
Maha, in the way that you're describing this sense of community and being a part of that in Palestine, it's really coming through so clearly. This describing like this way of feeling held by others, and we keep. That's one of the things we keep, I think, sensing into and talking about and calling each other into, I think, in our culture is, hey, we don't have to just kind of compete with each other, feel like we've got to, figure it out, on our own. Like, how do we sense into, call in our field of care and actually really create that and nourish that? And it sounds like that was such a huge part, not only of your experience, but when you were speaking earlier about how struck you were by all of the hardship and really, can we name it, the trauma that Palestinian people are experiencing on the daily in so many ways, but this deep sense of joy and connectedness and compassion seems to be kind of the piece that's really at the core of that, is that those strong community ties, that sense of connection.
Absolutely. And I was just telling this story the other day of this time I used to, as I mentioned before, I was able to access all parts of historic Palestine and Jerusalem. And I was working at the time in Jerusalem, and my colleagues who were Palestinians living in the West Bank were given special permission to go to our office in Jerusalem. They had to do that with permission, but they were not allowed to drive there themselves. So that would mean they would have to take public transportation, which would mean maybe a 3-hour commute for 14-kilometer distance, which should take about 15 minutes driving. So I would often drive them in, and we would have to go through checkpoints, military checkpoints, and I would be so angry going through those checkpoints, being stopped, having guns pointed at us by what are really young children, 18-year-olds, many of them Americans, who would determine whether we could cross or not, how long we would be kept for, etc. And so the way I would deal with it would be just, refusing to look at them, refusing to acknowledge their existence. And until a colleague that I would take in every day, his approach was different. A Palestinian colleague who, again, was not able to access his own land, would look the soldier in the eye and say good morning. I just remember the first time that happened, I thought, how could you do that? How can you even? And he just said, they can take my land, they can take my religious reason, they can take all these things, but they cannot take my humanity, they cannot take my heart. And so that was his way of really showing utmost resistance, and that was a huge learning for me in terms of and we've heard these stories many times in many different contexts of the oppressed, defying the oppressor by holding on to their humanity. But I tell you, it's so much easier said than done in reality. But that was just one example of that compassion and that humanity that I saw on a daily basis.
Yeah, I can imagine how powerful in that moment, to be to see that, in action, and to hear from your colleague, his stance in that way and his position of resistance in that way is powerful. I'm taking that in as well. And we started to talk about Farashe and this really beautiful community yoga studio that you co-created.
So Farashe means butterfly in Arabic. And our logo was designed by a wonderful Brazilian artist who donated this logo for us. It's of a lotus flower with a butterfly kind of at the top, and kind of a symbol of transformation. And Farashe opened in 2010, so it's it's turning 12 soon in November. And as I mentioned, it was a group of us, Palestinian and international colleagues, who were actually all working in international development at that time. And were incredibly frustrated because we felt that, again, we really questioned whether, we didn't question motive or intention of wanting to do good, but we questioned whether what we were doing was sustainable and really making a difference. And I had been hearing, over and over from friends, from colleagues about just wanting space to breathe. And so, Ramallah is a beautiful city, and it's kind of enclosed by a wall that surrounds it. And at any moment, the gates of these walls can close, and you're just kind of held captive, jailed in these cities in the West Bank. And it's become kind of the urban center of the West Bank, so quite crowded, quite congested. While it's, in quotations, under Palestinian Authority rule, when you're living under occupation, you don't have any sovereignty or any control. And so I just, hear and felt very much myself just needing space to breathe sometimes, because, it's just so the heaviness of living under occupation is such that sometimes you just feel that you can't breathe. And then also hearing from a dear friend of mine also about, wishing for space where families could go and kind of play together and be together. And so at that time, yoga really such a big part of my life in terms of my own practice and my own well-being. And I just thought, wouldn't it be wonderful to open a yoga center here in Ramallah, a place where people can breathe, where families can come and just play and breathe. And yeah, I kind of mentioned it to a friend who mentioned it to another friend, and that person approached me one day and said, "Hey, I heard you had this idea for a community yoga center," and said, well, and part of the idea also was that it would be completely community led. It would be completely volunteer. So embodying the principles of seva, of selfless service. And so, yeah, this person who was the president of a bridge development group, which is a real estate group in Palestine, said, I will give you space for free if this is something that you would like to do. And so it went from like a just an idea of like, wouldn't it be nice, to all of a sudden, here's the space, go for it. And so we did. So So I think it took us 6 months. The space was right in the center of Ramallah, accessible to all by public transportation. That was really important to us. Our mission is to make access to yoga, meditation, well-being practices accessible to all, and part of that is also in terms of geography. And yeah, and then volunteers, folks from everywhere just kind of came in and helped out, remodeled the place, redid the floors, painted, built stuff. And within 6 months, we had a center to open and only two yoga teachers. So at that point, I was not a yoga teacher. I had never dreamed of being a yoga teacher. That was not in my plan at all. But was kind of like, oh, well, we're opening this yoga center and we need some yoga teachers. So I hopped on a plane to the U.S., did my 200-hour teacher training, and went back. And there was another friend who had done her teacher training recently in, I believe it was Bali. So the two of us, we opened the doors on November 7th, 2010. We had no idea what was going to happen. And yeah, before we knew it, I think we were offering 2 classes a week or something. And before we knew it, we had packed classes. We had people traveling from like cities 2 to 3 hours away to attend. And yeah, the demand was much, much greater than we could meet. So it really, and I really think it was just in the stars. Everything came into alignment to kind of bring everybody together. This was community coming together to create this space for each other, and completely by volunteers, completely by donations, and is still going 12 years later.
What is some of the feedback or some of the experiences that you're hearing from folks that are finding release and play and whatever benefits that they are finding after being at Farashe?
Sure. Well, yoga was around and has been around in Palestine even before Farashe opened. We did open as, technically the first center that offers yoga classes. However, there were a few students who then became teachers of yoga in Palestine before that happened. So I think there's seekers everywhere, spiritual seekers everywhere. And it's actually not surprising that it found its way into Palestine. For many of our students that come through, what they've said is that it really has helped them to kind of reestablish their connection to their own faith. So there's a deep spirituality already existent in the culture, and I think the practice of yoga has been seen by many as a way to reconnect to that deep spirituality and faith. So the reaction was really that. That of course we have folks who come in for the physical part of the asana practice, and that's something we from the get-go were really kind of mindful of, not wanting it to just be a asana center, but really wanting it to be a yoga center that is about mind, body, breath connection. And spiritual activism, and that's why our commitment to it being a volunteer center is so strong. So yeah, we've had instances in kind of the most traumatic events where coming together at the center and participating in practices together has also been really useful. I'm remembering a time where this horrible bus accident that unfortunately it was a school bus accident that killed children. And I remember us thinking that day, like, oh, we are in mourning. This is a horrific accident, and should we even open the center today? Should we be mourning? And then we decided, well, these are the times when the practices are needed and can be most supportive. So we did open our doors, and folks came in. Folks who had never even done yoga before came that evening, and we just all sat together, and we were again packed, and we sat in silence together. And it really struck me then that at that moment how powerful the practice can be, and how powerful creating a space for people to come and sit in silence can be. And like I said, many had not even, they came knowing that they could do that there, and not having actually taken any classes before anything. So that's just one example, or lots of times kind of coming together in support of, for example, political prisoners, administrative detainees who are arrested and held without charge, coming together to also offer these practices for them. So I think it's really a space of healing together, of being together, and of trying to cultivate transformation together as well.
Maha, how's the pandemic impacted Farashe, and kind of what sorts of shifts, or even like new insights, or even new kind of pathways of creating space and supporting community have arisen in this time?
Oh, that's a great question, Leslie. Well, I think like most of the world, we were also impacted with not being able to come together in person. We also went through the lockdowns. What's interesting is that, and we moved everything online quite rapidly, and we were able to kind of sustain that way. However, of course, it was difficult. It was difficult both for the students and also for the teachers. Yeah, move everything online. We actually started our very first Arabic language yoga teacher training during the pandemic, and I think we met. Gosh, we started in January, I believe. So we met in person once, and I believe after that we had to move online all of a sudden and conduct this teacher training online, and it was a 10-month program, and we did it. And we graduated teachers, and they are now teaching at Farashe and other places. I have to say this also, Palestinians are so innovative, and they're so creative when met with some sort of challenge. So as you can imagine, when you're not really sure how or when you're going to get from point A to B because of checkpoints or closures or et cetera, you do find creative ways to manage. And so the pandemic was a challenge. It did affect things, and we were able to find really quick solutions thanks to that creativity.
Yeah. Amazing. Love finds a way, right?
yeah, always find a way. Yeah.
I want to touch on too a little bit about kind of maybe the initial pieces of scaling up and training more yoga teachers, and that was partly with Rama Shoti Vernon and with Shraddha Ruth Hartung. Yeah. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Of course I do. Yes. So grateful. I think, as I mentioned, we were only two when we started, and the demand was really high. And so we realized we need more yoga teachers to do this. And so we actually were very, very blessed by a great number of international yoga teachers who volunteered their time and came out to Palestine and conducted teacher trainings. So of the first ones was Anahata Yoga, and they came out and trained teachers. And one of the things I'll also mention is our focus wasn't so much about training yoga teachers as in just yoga teachers, but also training school teachers, health professionals, social workers, et cetera, who could use practices of yoga in their daily work, again, to make it as accessible as possible for folks. So a lot of our early kind of scaling up was around that, and really thanks to Anahata Yoga, Kazim Ali, and a myriad of others to whom I'm all so grateful for. And as time went on, we were also realizing that it was wonderful to have that support of internationals coming to Palestine to teach, and that we felt to really root as a center, we wanted to be able to train teachers ourselves in Arabic, because otherwise what we were doing is teachers would come and we would have everything translated, which also worked, and we felt would be really even more amazing if it was in Arabic. So Give Back Yoga, actually, Rob Schwer and Give Back Yoga had come to visit us and do some trainings and connected us with Rama, Georgi Vernon, and Shraddha. And that was a huge shift for us to be able to realize that dream of being able to conduct our own teacher trainings. So Rama and Shraddha came out to Palestine and taught workshops in a variety of settings, including health clinics and teachers and psychosocial counselors. And after that experience, we spoke a little bit more, and Shraddha had said that she would be very happy to help us kind of develop our own teacher training program. So 7 centers offered scholarships to 5 Palestinian yoga teachers or aspiring yoga teachers to come out to Sedona, Arizona, to take her 500-hour yoga teacher training, and from there be able to develop our own teacher training. And so that was an incredibly generous gift. And after the 5 of us completed that training, we worked closely with Shraddha to develop our training, which we really tried to contextualize for Palestinian context. So this is it's a yoga wellness training. That's what we call it. That hypertension and diabetes, and so we really tailored our teacher training to address those major issues, and it also includes Ayurveda, which we also have kind of Ayurveda and Palestinian traditional cooking and Palestinian wisdom around medicinal plants, et cetera, are actually quite similar. So that's been a really fun process of kind of seeing the linkage between the two, and making sure that indigenous traditions of Palestine are also incorporated. And and we came up with a teacher training program. We were certified by Yoga Alliance as well, and we launched our first teacher training in 2021. I believe. Yeah.
Well, this is just so inspiring, the way that that you went into this land, this community, and felt so embraced by both the land and the people, and then had such incredible vision and imagination to create this space. And I love so much the way you described it as this vision of a place where families could come together to play and to breathe. Just so beautiful. Oh, and so much gratitude as well to our beloved teachers who are on the star plane now, and hopefully continuing to still guide us, Shraddha and Rama both.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, we're so grateful. And um, and just hope that they're watching and seeing all of their wisdom and their teachings continuously growing with us. There's a there's a letter that Rama had written to yoga teachers. It's in her book, Sacred Geometry. It's just such a beautiful letter, and that's one we had translated into Arabic, and I constantly remind our teachers to go back to, because I think it really encapsulates what it is to be a forever student in the practice of yoga, which is really what we are, and to guide and share with others the teachings. And so, yeah, really so grateful for all the wisdom that they've given to us, and still feel them very much alive with us today.
I think one of the things that's so powerful in our conversation, Maha, and also in the example that they really, embodied for us too, was really, illustrating so clearly for us that yoga is such a universal practice. And I know that, I have seen in different settings that I have taught yoga in, and sometimes in introducing students to different contemplative practices, that there's sometimes a misconception, that folks feel as though these practices are somehow antithetical to whatever their own, spiritual practices or even, religious traditions are. And so there's, this a little bit of, I guess, additional kind of support and kind of guidance around, really sharing that there's not anything that you're being sort of asked to believe. There's nothing in your own faith that you need to abandon at all. And I think, in this conversation, it's so powerful the way that you're describing how so many of the participants at Farashe are like, this is bringing me even more deeply into my own spirituality, into my own practices, my own beliefs. And, looking at one of Rama's great embodied examples, in the world, with her brilliant conflict resolution training that she had employed in talks in her own human rights work, being invited to be this mediator and facilitator between diplomats from the then Soviet Union and the United States, when that was all starting to shift and change, and really taking the Yoga Sutras and building that into a whole methodology, if not, a curriculum that was so very useful, right? So useful and so effective, which really, to me, just it continues to demonstrate the universality of these practices, that it's really kind of calling us in to see ourselves and to see each other in more full ways.
Absolutely. And I think that's kind of in our evolution of Farashe, where we're also kind of landing at right now, as well as trying to learn and understand and embody what the Yoga Sutras, what the yogic philosophy says about justice and social justice, and how to do so in a transformative and generative way. And so that's what we're looking to dive into next, which is really, really exciting. And I mean, of course, it's there all the time, but to really take the time now to reflect and say, okay, well, how do these teachings, how can we work with these teachings in that way to to really stand for social justice and to create the world that we want to live in, and to embody that sense of love and connection and community that we all know is what is needed, and yet so easily, not so easy to always sustain. And so how can we use these practices to, as a reminder, to keep us in that place of loving community and working for justice and liberation?
Maha, I'm so grateful for this conversation. This has been just so wonderful to explore with you all of this really inspiring work, and I'm so grateful for you sharing your experiences too in Palestine. And so
Well, thank you so much, Leslie, for the opportunity to talk about these issues that are so dear to my heart, and to also give a voice for Farashe and for Palestine, and yeah, I just hope we can continue having these types of conversations about how to coming together in community to help ourselves find home with each other, so that we can really create the world that we want to be in. So, thank you so much.
thanks for listening. Conversations on Compassion is produced by me, Leslie Langbert, and the College of Social and Behavioral Sciences Center for Compassion Studies. Our engineer is Gary Darnell with the University Center for Assessment, Teaching, and Technology. To learn more about the Center for Compassion Studies, visit us online at compassioncenter.arizona.edu or follow us on Instagram at UA_Compassion Center.